Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, welcome to Midweek through a Scottish Prism. I hope you and yours are well. Got a great programme for you today. I'm very excited about this particular guest I have on. It's a new Scot who was born actually in Mariupol in the Donbass in the times of Brezhnev and the Soviet Union. She has witnessed the collapse of the Soviet Union, the birth of the Russian Federation and Ukraine as a separate nation, Perestroika and all the glasnost and all the things in between. She has a degree from a Russian university and has been over in the UK and living in the central belt of Scotland for quite some time now. I'm not going to say too much to identify Lena because, as we know, tragically in our country, we are riddled with russophobia. And it's while it's wrong, and we're meant to be a democracy, you know, the powers to be can be quite cruel, particularly when it comes to Russia and people of Russian descent. So to protect Lena, we are using a different name, and you will notice that the picture is also pixelated out. But that is all. Everything else you will see is genuine, is true. And Lena was in touch with me to talk. Like the rest of those of us who actually do know what's going on, we're fed up with fed up with hearing the wrong news and the narrative, which isn't strictly true. Lena's here to set the record straight and tell us from someone who lives and was brought up in the Donbass what has actually happened, what's going on now, and hopefully what the future holds. So without further ado, let me welcome Lena to the show. Lena, welcome to Through a Scottish Prism. Thank you for being here.
Hello, thank you for having me here. Thank you.
Yeah, as I said in my introduction, you were born in the Donbass in the times of Brezhnev, and you'll have seen dramatic changes since then. Can you just talk us through, the audience, through how Ukraine came into being and why it was when the Soviet Union broke up, Ukraine became a separate state?
Well, I suppose at that time I was still relatively young, and but I obviously distinctly remember how guy called Gorbachev, who is greatly admired in this part of the world, came into power, and he wanted to kind of bring the Soviet Union integrate it into the West. I don't know that much about this, but that's when the troubles began, really, with the fact that he was so keen to make a change. And what I might just only say from my point of view is the experience what we as people in our part of Soviet Union, which is Donbass, which is actually Russian part, being in Ukraine, what we experienced. And it was a very hard lifetime we had. And then the worst thing came when Yeltsin came. When Yeltsin came, of course, the people here think Yeltsin is a great guy. Yeltsin brought so much of freedom, and he brought Russia to the West, and so on, and we love Yeltsin and so on. Well, if you ask any Russian person, if you ask any person from ex-Soviet Union anything about Yeltsin, they would tear him to shreds while he was alive. He was greatly heated, if I can use these two words. He was greatly heated, and he brought collapse to every family in our country. Those genuine families I'm talking about, not those oligarchs, not those money grabbers who picked up everything they want, everything they could possibly pick up in the society and scatter abroad. So at that time, Ukraine already was separate, and Soviet Union collapsed. and it was very difficult. The people had to find different ways, means and ways to pretty much feed the family, and day to day wasn't really a pleasant life. Where, let's say, my dad, who was actually an engineer for the space program, it was Cosmos in Soviet Union, and he was responsible for the bottom part of the rockets. He was an engineer for the bottom part of the rockets, and every time when they assembled those rockets, he had to go to Baikonur and see the rockets fly. So he was a top-notch engineer. He obviously couldn't find anything. There are lots of people who were like that. Intelligentsia struggled. At the time, obviously at that time, it was more prominent, especially in Ukraine, where our part of Ukraine, which we came from Donbass, we were primarily, and we are Russians primarily, where the people speak, the first language was their Russian. Most of the families Russian, and the such a thing as Ukrainians. Yes, maybe the people identify themselves as on the passport Ukrainians. However, deep down, we were all Russians, and the difference. That's where we kind of felt mostly the difference between Russia and Ukraine. That's not really, I wouldn't really say much as a difference as such as, or pointing fingers, but it's
Sorry to interrupt you. Would I be right in saying that it was Khrushchev who put the Donbass into the Ukraine Soviet Republic?
It was Crimea. He put Crimea into Ukraine, but Donbass became Ukrainian straight after the putsch in 1917. People call it revolution, but it was February Revolution, where the provisional government came in, and then it was the Lenin coup d'etat in October. And after that, I'm not a politician. My understanding, what they wanted to dilute, and they wanted to become Ukraine more as a part of Soviet Union, and that's why part of Russia were taken from Russia and joined to Ukraine. Ukraine is a patchwork state, as probably many people know. There are bits came from Russia, bits came from Poland, bits came from Hungary, and so on, and only the central part is Ukrainian.
Yeah, part of it's Romania as well, isn't there? A bit of Moldova.
Mm-hmm.
So you were a child in the Ukraine, and sorry before I do that, but Odessa, the city of Odessa, I think it's the second or third biggest city in the Ukraine, or one of the big cities. It was founded by Catherine the Great back in the 17th century, isn't that right?
That's absolutely correct. It was the 18th. The 18th century. It was in 18th century. That's when her Potemkin and Orlov, so she was very keen to acquire Crimea. Again, she didn't start the Crimean War, and in fact, I remember years and years ago, I took my family to Crimea, and we went around on a trip, and there is a range, a mountain range, the range they called Mackenzie Mountains. So the guide told us that actually Mackenzie, the Russians call it Mackenzie Mountains. But it was a Scottish general during the Catherine the Great Crimean Wars, the war for Crimea. There was a Scottish general, Mackenzie, and he was quite a famous, quite effective general, and quite fair as well to people. So that's the stories we were told. So when the Crimean War ended, and Catherine the Great was so impressed with his achievements and what he managed to bring to the Russian crown, so she granted him big pieces of land in Crimea, and he he lived there happily ever after, apparently. And what they also say about this general, when they called him Mackenzie in Russia, apparently he was quite fair to the people. Of course, at that time in Russia there was serfdom, and he was quite fair to the people there. And in fact, if you go to, and I'm kind of going away from the topic that you're suggesting by going and linking Russia with Scotland, which you might find quite interesting. If you walk in Edinburgh, you would see Lermont Street. It's just in the West End of Edinburgh, Lermont Street. So there is a famous poet, Lermontov, Russian poet Lermontov. He is the direct descent of a Scottish famous, I believe he was a Scottish famous general who also came to Russia to fight for Catherine the Great. And Lermontov, the poet, the Russian poet, directly descended from him. So the links between actually Russia and Scotland are very close.
And of course, St. Andrew, we share St. Andrew, our patron saint.
That's right. And if you go to any Russian house, I would probably say Ukrainian house as well. I grew up in Ukraine and I know lots of Ukrainian families in Mariupol and so on. And again, that's how you identify yourself, Ukrainian or Russian. You go to all these families and you see the bookshelves and there's always Burns, and always Walter Scott books, always. And the people in Russia, they like to recite Roddy Burns poems. And in fact, there are big, groups. Yes, Burn suppers celebrated in Russia, celebrated in Kiev. It's a very big tradition to have Scottish Burn suppers there. You know, many people know Roddy Burns and, of course, Walter Scott. He's world famous.
So just to sort of encapsulate it all, you were saying about the Donbass was always Russian, but at one point it was put in there after during or around about the Russian Revolution to make it more of a Soviet republic part of the group. That was to give it a bit of flavour, but it was actually Russian. And the Crimea was Russian. And Odessa, which is in the far southwest, for those who don't know.
Another Russian place.
Another very Russian. So that's the background to it. It's part Romanian, part Polish. It's very much a patchwork nation, Ukraine. So bringing us on to modern times, if I may, to get to this. Now, the narrative getting put out is that that no one mentions the coup, the Maidan coup of 2014. Can you give us your view of what happened to Yankovic, if I pronounced that correctly? I apologize for
Yanukovych. Yanukovych. Yeah. Well, again, I have to say I'm not a politician, but we can hear lots of politicians, and I suppose the people, they can hear the propaganda from the TV, from mass media, all this brainwash, and I really call it brainwash. I don't really want to actually be polite here. You put TV on, you switch it on, you put radio on, and what you hear, you only hear war started in 2022. 2022. No, the war started in 2014, and it wasn't a war when the Russians invaded. Not many people know how the Ukrainian, obviously, yes, Yanukovych was knocked down and he was democratically elected. Yes, he had lots of faults. Yes, he was corrupt. Absolutely, nobody denies it. As his predecessor and subsequently Poroshenko and subsequently the current Zelensky guy. So he was just as corrupt, but he was democratically elected. And what happened to him, it was again all artificially created when he was brought down and the new government it wasn't even elected. The new Ukrainian interim government and then eventually Poroshenko. So at that time, when he was brought down and the government changed, Crimea decided, the Crimean people decided that we want to side with Russia and we want to become part of Russia. So very quickly they went and arranged a referendum. Now the percentage of people, I mean, you think how many people in Scotland go and vote for their current government? You would be lucky if 50% of population will go and vote. In Crimea, it was over 90% of population went and they voted. And don't tell me that all of these guys were standing at the gunpoint voting for becoming part of Russia, right? So the same, and Russia took Crimea very quickly, or sort of with the wish of Crimean people, they became Russian. Similarly, later on, Donbass followed the suit, and I remember my family told me at that time when they were standing for over 3 hours in the queue for election, 3 hours to stand to vote to become part of Russia in Mariupol. And when they voted, everyone in Mariupol got up very, very early in the morning and stood in a referendum, waiting in the queue to go and vote, to cast a vote for over 3 hours. And again, at the gunpoint, seriously, and the people believe that in this country. So they voted, they were very happy, but of course, they didn't become part of Russia because Putin said at that time that pretty much deal with your own government. Yourself.
Sorry to interrupt. He recommended against actually holding the referendum at all, didn't he? He knew it would cause trouble. But could I just go back a step, Lena? Yes. Was the reason one of the reasons they held the referendum in Donbass was the fact that the government in Kiev had outlawed the Russian language, the teaching of Russian or Russian history or anything, and they went, "That's not for us." Is that correct?
Yes. One of them, yes, and another part, again, we're going back to the fact that the bus wasn't Ukrainian and they had an opportunity to go and join the country where they belong to. As Crimea, they wanted to go back to Russia and they achieved that. Donbass wanted to go back to Russia and only now they are trying to achieve it. So, yes, you're right, saying about language. That language, the Russian language, wasn't allowed in Ukraine. If you go, let's say, if you go to the shops, the shop assistants were very strongly encouraged to speak Ukrainian. The books, the teachers themselves, the teachers struggled because all of a sudden everybody spoke Russian, everybody knew only Russian. Of course, people knew Ukrainian, but Ukrainian was the second language. And all of a sudden, the teachers and the doctors had to find themselves to treat the patients in Ukrainian, to teach chemistry in Ukrainian, to teach physics in Ukrainian, and so on, so on. Even the names of our famous poets like Pushkin, our famous Russian poet Pushkin, had to be translated into Ukrainian. Garmatenko, that's absolutely ridiculous. It was actually so pathetic. They tried so hard to change everything in Ukrainian. Never mind, of course, paperwork and so on, so on. So the people wanted to speak and communicate in their own language, and they suggested make it Russian as a second official language. No.
Translating Pushkin into Ukrainian would be like translating Rabbi Burns into English, wouldn't it?
Yes. Well, exactly. What would it be? I don't know, but I suppose it's for the linguists to sort it out. But unfortunately, when the referendum happened in Mariupol, soon after that, the Ukrainian tanks rolled on the streets of Mariupol. and the police quarters were set alight because the police apparently they sided with the population, with the people. Similarly happened. Everybody knows what happened in Odessa, right? When the building of the union was also burned alight, and the people,
a lot of people don't,
out.
Lena, so I wonder if you could tell the people exactly what happened in Odessa with the trades house.
Yes, I'm not. I'm afraid at this point I'm not really going to talk a lot about Odessa because I don't really want to. I'm not that well sort of equipped or prepared to talk exactly about Odessa, right? But I can say
but people were burned alive, weren't they?
Yes.
People were burned
alive. They
were
jumping out of the windows. Yes, so there was a big number. It's more than 100 people actually died in that building in the Union headquarters because again they sided with Russians. So they locked them up and they set the building alight. So many people had to jump out, and everybody saw these horrific scenes. What was happening, but unfortunately, not many people know the history or the background of why it happened, why people chose the path to become Russians, why we only are told in this country only the part of a story. We see only the tip of the iceberg, but nobody knows the 2/3 of the iceberg, what's going on in the background, what is the history and the background of why people feel strongly that they want to be this or that, right? Why Donbass people don't want to do anything with Ukrainians, right? Why Crimea? We went 2 years, in 2016, we went to Crimea. I took my family there again. And at that time, the people were still running around with the flags saying Krim nash, means Crimea is ours, and it was Russian flags. People were still celebrating. So who actually was holding the gunpoint voting? It's a lie here. The people are fed. The people, and this is a danger. I feel, well, many people feel that this is the danger, that the truth deliberately withheld from the population in this country to create, as you mentioned, the start of this program, russophobia, russophobic attitudes towards many Russian people, because it's convenient. It's convenient to send, let's say, the last 3.6 billion pounds to the most corrupt person in the world so that he would pocket this money, but cover it up with, we are sending to help democratic Ukraine. Seriously, where is the democratic Ukraine? Those who actually didn't want to give those who didn't want to give choice to the Russian people to speak and express themselves in their own language. Why Canada has got 2 languages, French and English? Why Ukraine cannot have 2 languages? Why many countries in Europe have got 2 languages?
Belgium has about 5. Switzerland has about 5.
Exactly, absolutely. So why Ukraine cannot have to? Because we cannot identify Russian people in Ukraine, and again, russophobia. It's so convenient to send now billions and billions and billions pounds to Ukraine. To fight who? To fight Russians, but Russians and Ukrainians, they are like brothers and sisters. Yeah. We are together. My dad is Ukrainian, my mom is Russian. There are many of us like this. I'm half Russian, half Ukrainian, and majority of us like this.
I've often said it would be like Scotland fighting Ireland.
Aye, absolutely.
That would be the same thing.
Absolutely. I don't know, something I wanted to say. It will come back to me. Sorry.
So that's me interrupting you. How terrible! I'm very rude. I beg your pardon. Okay. To move on a wee bit now, I know you're saying and you're not political, and you've not got a political axe to grind, but the President Zelensky, who we've mentioned, people say that it's not a fascist regime. Some people say it is a fascist regime with Azov, etc. You, as someone from the Ukraine, with a foot in both camps, for want of a better way of saying it, would you say it is a fascist regime?
And yes and no. Yes and no, and I don't know. But I can say you something about the fascists in Mariupol. Talking about the fascist regime, everybody knows the glorious people, the glorious saviors of Mariupol called Azov Brigade, right?
Yeah, Azov, yeah.
So, in 2018, I think, we went to Mariupol. I took my family to Mariupol at that time. It was Ukraine, so it was easy to travel. And we even took the pictures. What they've done, this glorious Azov Brigade, they expropriated, and I cannot say another word, expropriated the schools across the city. And Mariupol is a huge city. At that time, there were over 500,000 population. They expropriated schools. They expropriated the best pioneer camps, which is just resort holidays to the children, because Mariupol is on the seaside. They also expropriated the sanatoriums for people where they would recover and recuperate, and they took it for their headquarters. They boarded it up and they put the SS swastika insignia on the gates, identifying that that's us. We are Azov Brigade. And before it was the school. Before it was the children's camp. Before it was the sanatorium. They were marching across the streets with the Nazi salutes, with all their flags, and the people in Mariupol couldn't say anything because they obviously were afraid. The accounts I was told from my family, from my cousins, from my friends who saw things, who heard things, who were told things about Azov Brigade at that time were horrific. And when Mariupol was sieged, let's say sieged, and again, what does it mean? Sieged by Russians or sieged by Nazis? Who were Azov people, glorious Mariupol saviors, who didn't allow people of Mariupol to escape, who stopped them with the gunpoint, stopped their cars when the people wanted to escape Mariupol at the time when Mariupol was bombed or shelled. They kept people of Mariupol as meat, they call it meat, flesh, so that they could actually use them as shield.
Yeah, human shields. Yeah.
The people and what they did, and honestly, the amount of videos I saw there, because at that time I lost the connection with my mom and with my brother and with the rest of my family. I was looking for them, and I had to go through a huge amount of videos to see what was going on in Mariupol at that point and what they did. I call them cockroaches because they reminded me of the cockroaches, all the tanks, the Ukrainian tanks. They were not hiding somewhere in the headquarters. They were hiding just outside the people's houses. They were hiding just outside the schools. And what they've done, they obviously expropriated the high-rise flats, the top levels of the high-rise flats. They broke down all the walls down so they can run across from one side to another, and they would position their guns right to the roofs of these high-rise flats, etc. So no wonder why the Russians did direct shelling into the tops of the buildings. And it still continues exactly the same across, whether it's Bakhmut, whether it's other places in Ukraine, and so on and so on. So the amount of my friend, he has a flat in Mariupol, and he rented this property to a single mother. So the Nazi guy, this Azov guy, the glorious savior, came into that flat. He opened up the door and he said to that woman, right, you have 5 minutes to collect your belongings and out, or otherwise you would be shot. And this happened to many. My cousin lost her property exactly the same way. Exactly the same way. My godparents, they were shoved from pillar to post by these wonderful glorified people, and from one place to another, they had to hide in one corner so that the Azov Brigade would position themselves in all the flats they wanted. It wasn't sieged. So you asked the question, would it be a siege by the Russians, or was it a siege by the Ukrainian glorious army called Azov people? You know, how many, I wanted to actually to say, I went on the BBC to talk about this. I wanted to say some things, at least, to say not that not all the Russians are so bad, because many Russian volunteers came with the bread and water to help local people, to help people in Mariupol. And I contacted these people, the volunteers who actually went around helping people to give them some food and water, and to help them with connecting with people, medication, etc., etc. BBC didn't put a single word about this. They didn't allow me to talk about this, because it's, again, propaganda, nothing good coming from Russians.
Now, Mariupol is now in the middle of a rebuild, and I've seen some videos. It's looking great in places. Some people say it was liberated, and other people would say it's occupied by the Russians. Do you think it was liberated, or is it occupied?
I think it's absolutely fine to both sides, because there are people in Mariupol who feel that they are occupied. And there are people in Mariupol who feel that they are being liberated. When we went to Mariupol this summer, and again, I took my family again this summer, and it's already the Russian Mariupol. So we traveled actually from north of Russia, visiting St. Petersburg, and all the way down south to Mariupol. And put it this way, everybody who I spoke to, and they didn't know, everybody I spoke, whether would it be a taxi driver or a person in a bus or my neighbors or the people who know me and I don't know them, they all say the same, that we are happy that the Russians came. We're happy that the Russians came. And I don't think that it would be, they don't really need to lie to me. I'm nobody. However, at the same time, what they said, that there would be people here, they call them zhduny. Zhduny is those who wait, the waiting people.
The waiters,
so
the
waiters, they wait for the Ukrainians to come back and take Mariupol back to Ukraine. Well, they probably would have to wait for God knows what. I don't know. It's a fairy tale probably for them to happen.
Other people also say that in the 8 years of the Civil War, if we can call it a civil war,
yes,
that the number's been banded about 15,000 people from the Donbass died.
Yes.
The narrative, of course, from the West is, oh, that's not true. Is it true that 15,000 died?
Of course, I am not the guy who would not the one who would be keeping the statistics, but that's the statistics coming from different sources. 15,000 died. Yes, I wouldn't. Why? You have to ask the question why. Why the Western media doesn't tell the truth. The people who live in West, they have to ask the question why Western media doesn't tell us the truth, or tell us half truth, or tells us lies. What is the reason for them to do it? And they know themselves that they do it pretty well. They know themselves. How many journalists, and it's not only in Great Britain, how many journalists who dared to put their head above the parapet, they actually was brought back? How many people lost their jobs? How many people who dared to say something were racially, I don't know, discriminated, etc., etc. There is a reason for that, and the reason maybe for that is you think about the Ukraine. Why West is so keen to get Ukraine for so many years, for over than 10 years. We think about these orange revolutions. The orange revolutions start when the Soviet Union collapsed. First of all, that's when they started grabbing everything in Ukraine. The natural resources are second to none. Even the Nazi Germany, when they came to Ukraine, what they did, they took the soil by the train
trucks,
and they shifted it back to Germany. The natural resources in Ukraine. I mean, you think about coal, you think about my goodness,
wheat,
everything, absolutely everything. So they want all these things. But what is happening? The greatest natural resource of Ukraine, and I think it's a human resource, is now collapsing so fast. And it's actually very sad to see that the poor Ukrainian people are so brainwashed that they think we are going to fight against Russia. No, you're not fighting against Russians. You are just the meat. You are the pawns on the chessboard, and you're just the pawns. You don't have a say.
Yeah, well,
you've been shifted by other big people in the West, and you've been told what to do.
Yeah. You ask why did the Western media do it? I mean, there's a classic example today where as soon as the Russians in February 22, it was a terrible invasion and it was wrong and against international law, invading a sovereign country. Today, Israel have done the exact same in Lebanon, but it's been reported as an incursion, as a limited military operation. Not an invasion into a sovereign nation. The same Western media that are telling us that everything that Israel does is legal, but everything that Russia does is illegal. It's hypocrisy.
Yes, exactly. You think why they support Israel that much? Why they the language, the rhetoric is so well tailored to suit their needs. And their needs currently is to create, to antagonize the population of the West against everything Russian. I mean, you think it's like the people laugh at it. I mean, put it this way: you would drive through. It's just a curiosity. If you drive through Edinburgh, right, and you see lots of Ukrainian flags hanging out of the windows, right, and all the tenements and so on. I wonder, out of just curiosity, you take out and you put either Israel flag because you see lots of Palestinian flag, or let's say opposite, you put the Russian flag, you hand out the Russian flag. Would you do that? There are lots of people who support Russians.
Would I do it? Are you asking me if I would? You're asking me if I would do it?
No, I'm asking out of the curiosity, if people would do it, what would happen to them?
Oh, yeah, they would get it. It's the same as people with Palestinian flags are getting arrested now, but people with Israeli flags aren't.
Why?
Well, it is. But I mean, another part of the hypocrisy was yesterday, the United Nations voted to lift the blockade on Cuba. Since 1960, it's been there. 3 countries opposed it: America, Ukraine, and Israel. And of course, the Americans won't allow the blockade to be lifted. And they say they're going around the world giving everyone democracy. They are not a democratic country at all. But as you talk about the resources of Ukraine, it's the resources of Russia that America envy. They want them.
That's right. Absolutely. That's why they glorified Yeltsin, and that's why they hate Putin that much. But who knows? that Putin took so many people in Russia out of poverty? Who knows that Putin rounded all these money grabbers, oligarchs, round the table and said, look, guys, you stole money from the society. You stole all these assets from the society. You have to share. You have to give it back to the people. Some of them, like Berezovsky, some of them, like another guy who owned Chelsea, they skedaddled. Right? Because they didn't want to, and there are lots of them like this. However, many of them shared. I'm not saying Putin is a wonderful guy, but who is? Is the current Keir Starmer wonderful? Is the Joe Biden wonderful? Far from it. However, Putin brought country from the ashes. Putin raised salaries of doctors and the teachers in Russia. Putin trying to sort out the health system, and now it's 100 times better than it was during Yeltsin. Putin sorted out the social securities in Russia, and the social system of Russia is also he's addressing it, and he's doing so well. And the people in Russia, the majority of ordinary people, they're really happy with what he's doing. He's reviving places. He's reviving all the churches. He's rebuilding everything in even main Russia. Never mind places like Mariupol. You know, of course, nobody knows this, but people know how bad he is. He invaded Ukraine. Wait a second. What do you know? What he tried to do before? Do you know that before, at the beginning of the 21st century, he was so keen to become part of NATO?
Yeah.
And what he was said, no, go away.
Yeah, exactly.
Why this? Nobody knows that when America was chasing Osama bin Laden, and when the tragic thing happened in America with Twin Towers, he was the first one who was very keen to share intelligence about the Muslim people, the Muslim fanatics, etc. Right? He was at that time very, very keen to continue working with the West and saying, look, guys, I'm not your enemy. Mm-hmm. We have the same enemy. We share the same enemy. Let's work together. Oh. Nobody was interested.
No, they're not. That's the point. They want to be doing it all themselves. Now, the other thing we haven't mentioned was, of course, in 2041, the first thing was the Minsk Accords, which were negotiated to try and bring a settlement between, because if I'm not mistaken, the Donbass originally wanted to be an independent republic within Ukraine.
Yes, yes, my understanding that that time Donbass wanted to have a similar status as Crimea, as an autonomous republic, and having some, let's say, double language and so on, some autonomy in decision making, etc. Yes.
Yeah, and then the Minsk agreements were a sort of peace treaty between the two warring factions. But we've since heard from her own mouth, from Angela Merkel and President Hollande of France, that the West were not negotiating honourably. They were trying to buy time so that NATO could build up the Ukrainian army to attack Russia, basically, or the Donbass. That is the fact, is it not?
Yes, that's right. So subsequently, she came out admitting that Minsk agreements were just farce, and they were just trying to prolong time to equip Ukraine with the weapons, training, military equipment, etc., etc. That's when it was the rise of the Azov Brigade, and not on and other brigades, other Nazi brigades across, and that's where there was a huge glorification of Bandera, a wonderful Bandera, who actually persecuted the Jewish people and the Polish people, the Ukrainian guy, during the World War II. That time, my understanding, we as Great Britain paid from our taxes some money to support Ukraine. But we didn't know what we were supporting. We were supporting training the Ukrainian soldiers. We were equipping them with the military equipment and so on, to prepare them for to fight against who, right?
Yeah, but how do you feel when you see things like, Russia blew up the Nord Stream gas pipe? Russia's attacking the power station, the nuclear power station. And you know this to be lies, but you see that from the Western media. Does that get you angry?
Angry? I don't think it's angry. Angry is not the word I would probably describe this. Despair and sadness for our local, for our population in the West. We're like sheep. We are fed what we're given, and again deliberately. It's easy to roll a sheep. You just herd them in one column and then slaughter them. You tell them what to do and they do it. So people obviously don't. We were told, the prices for gas and electricity are rising and rising and rising. Let's blame Putin. Putin is bad. Well, though it wasn't really his fault. But yes, we're paying triple prices, etc. But we don't know who is guilty in this. That's not Putin who is guilty. That was deliberately done. So that's what gas are we getting now? What fuel we're getting now? All coming from America, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So they keep the target.
Russia didn't need to blow up the pipe. All they had to do was switch it off at the Russia, and the pipe stopped.
No,
so
that wasn't the Russians who did it. Now America apparently pointing fingers at the Ukrainians. And it's youth, obviously, these people. And who is now in a big trouble? Germany. And because they have all these industry and they have to pay triple prices.
Sure. You would think the Germans would have learned about sending tanks into Russia, but apparently not.
They have short memory. Or maybe it's the problem that the people who rule us, they don't know the history that well, so they don't know the lessons.
Well, talking of that history at Brezhnev, another one, the Western narrative and the Russophobia comes out, and it's probably one of the greatest insults you can put on Russians, is the fact that they call Putin a fascist and that the Russians are fascists. And I mean, I cannot think of any bigger insult to Russian people, but that's one of the narratives they use. What do you say to that?
Yeah, the Russians who fought the fascists, they are the fascists now. How interesting. Of course, nobody, I mean, how many people know who liberated Auschwitz?
Yeah, and yet the Russians are not being allowed to go to the commemorative ceremony. It's
many Brits, many Brits probably think, we, Great Britain, liberated Auschwitz. Wait a second, that was the Soviet army. However, the Soviet army actually consisted of Ukrainians as well, right? So there was Georgians, there was Belarusians, Ukrainians, Russians, people from the Middle East. The Soviet army was huge from the whole of the Soviet country, including the Ukrainians. You know, I mean, my granddad, we've got a diary of the letters of him going through the war, and I translated it to my husband in English, how he corresponded with his wife. And he had a very detailed account about where he fought and what was happening. And at the start, it was like all the Germany, all these the German soldiers, etc., etc. By the end, when he was reaching Prague or crossing the border already, fighting not in a Soviet soil, he was calling them that scum, and so on. The people of Russia have everybody lost somebody in that we call it Great Patriotic War. And because the Soviet Union was invaded in 1941, we call it Great Patriotic War. Everybody lost somebody there. Therefore, people, when they hear that, when they are called fascists or something to that extent, it hurts them deeply to the heart, because it was fascists who killed their brothers or their fathers or their granddads, etc., etc. It was against the fascists the Soviet people fought and died, and actually they liberated many countries from God knows, I even can't explain. It's something like what's happening in Auschwitz and so on.
The other one that they're going on with about, we must defeat, Ukraine must win, which is just not going to happen. We must defeat Russia because Putin, who is terribly unpopular in Russia and who's insane, is wanting to recreate the USSR and conquer the whole of Europe. Again, ridiculous, but it is part of the narrative they're putting out there.
Because it's used, because it needs this narrative. It's very important for them to be able to take money from me, to take money from my children, to take money from every poor Scottish granny and granddad, and every poor single mother and father, and every poor single disabled person, and give it to Ukrainian, to the Ukrainian corrupt government and the Ukrainian corrupt regime. And it's very convenient, obviously, this rhetoric, so no, Ukraine is not going to win, because Ukraine doesn't have enough people to win. People, I mean, how many people died recently? There was a statistic, how many people died in Kursk, the Ukrainians.
Yeah, in Kursk there's been something like 32,000 or something have died since the Ukrainians.
Died, exactly, died. So how many came back home injured? And what is happening to those Ukrainian people who coming back home to Ukraine, if they have home left, of course, and they are now without eyes, or without limbs, or without ribs, or whatever? What is happening to them? They are going to have post-traumatic stress disorder. They are going to turn alcoholics and eventually to die again. People of Ukraine are melting like a snow of the day.
It's what's going to happen to them long term, because there was a great phrase by Henry Kissinger, of no less, who said, being an enemy of America is dangerous. Being a friend is fatal. And you've just got to look, at Saddam Hussein, who was a friend at one point, is a classic example. Yeah. Zelensky and Ukraine will be dumped, same as Afghanistan was dumped.
Zelensky is not friend, Roddy. I'm afraid Zelensky is a vassal. He's not friend. He's a vassal.
Yeah, and the Americans, as they were in the First War and the Second War, they're quite happy to see other nations doing the heavy lifting, and they try and come in at the end for the glory. But there's going to be no glory in Ukraine. They're going to fight to the last Ukrainian. They're not. Zelensky is not, in my opinion, he doesn't have the right to stop this war. It's only Joe Biden and the White House and the Pentagon that will stop this war. Do you agree?
Well, I don't know. Again, I'm not a politician. With regards to Zelensky, yes, he doesn't have that power because he's a vassal. So because he pockets lots of money, millions and millions, it's convenient for him. It's enough to just watch Mark Ritter. And Mark Ritter had a 2-part program about Zelensky and how corrupt he is, and where he's got the properties. You can search it up on the YouTube. The people can find it. It's absolutely amazing. In fact, I would suggest anybody to watch Mark Ritter. Talking about russophobia, I would advise people to watch and to listen to Glenn Deason.
Yeah.
his accounts about, he actually wrote recently the book about russophobia and why it's going on in the West. Very interesting accounts. It also can be easily found on the YouTube. His lecture
Colonel
about
Douglas MacGregor's another very good one.
Another good one, yes. He's actually quite inspirational. So
I'm hoping that if Mr. Trump becomes the president again, that Douglas MacGregor gets the defence job, because I think he could make a big difference. He's found this war ridiculous from day one. And
yes,
I read an article recently, and just for our viewers, so you know, in uniform, Russia has over 2 million people in uniform, folks. The Americans have less than 100,000 ground soldiers. So just remember that when they're talking about they're going to go in and kick ass. It ain't going to happen, folks.
No. Yeah, it's they poke a bear, and the bear is getting angry and more frustrated, and the bear might start roar. And if it roars, think about what's going to happen to Scotland, who's got nukes.
And we also make the Storm Shadow missiles just outside Glasgow, so it could be blown away as well.
Yes. So what's going to happen? What's going to happen to these places? You know, and we have to definitely the people who are mighty in our country, they thought about this. But the population of our country, unfortunately, they're kept in the dark. They're kept in the dark deliberately.
Well, I would suggest that the West, or the US, I mean, it's like, let's be honest, it's a US NATO proxy war, and they set out to weaken Russia. I think that's had the exact opposite effect. Would you say that's fair?
Yes, definitely. I would agree with you on that, and I hope I'm right. I would agree with you on that. Russia is getting stronger. At any point, again, if you look at the history of Russia, at any point when it was disturbed or rattled by another mighty ones, we talk about Napoleon, we talk about Hitler, and we talk back to Peter the Great, we talk about Poltava, Friedrich, was it in English? Charles XII, who there was a major fight, the major battle between the Russians, the Swedes, that's right, in Poltava, and they were defeated, and so on. So Russia initially took a big blow, but after that they united together. That's one of the greatest qualities of Russian people, which actually makes me very proud to be part of them, is when in a time of need we unite.
Yeah, it is a very multicultural land. I mean, it's the biggest landmass in the world, but it's a multicultural. I mean, from Europe to Asia.
It's a very diverse. It's a very diverse society.
But they all love Mother Russia.
Yes, I would say so. It's a very diverse society, but at the same time, it's very inclusive, where the people, let's say, when we went to Mariupol just in summer, and Mariupol is rebuilt by there's a big influx of the people from other places like Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, from the Middle Eastern ex-republics. So they are getting paid very well in Mariupol. So there is a big influx of them to Mariupol, and the people in Mariupol, they're absolutely. I wouldn't say that all of them are ecstatically happy, but most of them I spoke to, and they say yes, it's great. And you see already the mixture of the families. You see. Already people getting together and building the units, the family units, and settling down in Mariupol. So I can see actually hopefully if we come back in 5 years, I would see quite lots of mixed families running around, when the babies, children running around.
Yeah, that'll be frightening to a lot of British people. I thought of that very thing. But we're running out of time here, Lena, and I want to thank you very much for being here and giving us all your views. But I always like to try and end on a positive note. Can you see this conflict coming, the SMO coming to an end? It looks at the moment as if the Russians are moving forward massively on all fronts. Will it end soon, do you think?
I cannot really say. I'm not again a politician, and I only can say I hope and I want to end it soon. But at the same time, the Russians, as they say, they've got agenda and they have the targets to achieve. And I am afraid that one of the targets is going to be the Russian place Odessa.
And of course, it's a Russian city, yeah.
And what about Kiev? Kiev is a cradle of Kiev Rus. And what is Kiev Rus? It's a mother, the cradle of Russia. So, but also it's not about just all this hypothetical, oh, let's get Odessa because it's Russian place. No, they need to secure their borders because otherwise Russia will be Crimea will be continued attacked and targeted by the Ukrainians. They need to secure this area.
Yeah, but the thing is that will make Ukraine a landlocked country. And then, as you pointed out right at the beginning, then Romania might want a wee bit, and the Poles might want a wee bit, and Hungarians might want a wee bit. And
not might. They
left.
Already want. It's not even the conditional mood might want. They already want a wee bit, and they want something that once belonged to them. It's natural. It's only normal. So in terms of when it's going to end, I don't know, but we all want to end it soon. And I want to end it soon, even for the sake of the poor Ukrainian people who flee and who end up here in this country, being taken away from their homes. Many of them struggle here. Many of them want to come back home. They can't.
Yeah. And the other thing is, what might happen is that the Americans might turn all their attention to helping their pals in the Middle East, Israel, and abandon Ukraine to their fate. But anyway, time will tell. I think when Chasiv Yar falls, that could be the beginning of the end. Lena, thank you very, very much for your time. I really appreciate it. And
thank you, Roddy, for having me here.
And I hope the viewers, you've enjoyed this as much as I've enjoyed talking to Lena. And until we see you all again, you and yours, please take care.
Thank you. Thank you.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.